Testing.
Today is Wednesday, March 20th, 2024. We are at Connors Elementary School and we'll call the meeting to order at 5:35 p.m. and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Done the pledge almost every day for like a long time.
Agenda item number 2 or school committee member introductions. We'll start with Counselor Harriman and go around the room.
Scott Harriman, City Council Representative to the School Committee.
Donna Gallant, Ward 7.
Megan Hurd, Ward 6.
Ashley Medina, Ward 5.
Craig Charpentier, Ward 4.
Elizabeth Eames, Ward 3. Sorry for the eating earlier.
Janet Bowden, Ward 2.
Phoenix McLaughlin, Ward 1.
Megan Parks at large.
Jake Lane was superintendent.
Karen Paquette, Assistant Superintendent.
Agenda item number 3 is the school budget workshop.
Gonna fix the Zoom so I can share some slides like we have in the past. Tonight we'll jump in with conversations around what happened recently, just for those who might be watching, and go into some different options to just guide the discussion. Let me see here. Just as a quick recap, we had a joint meeting on Monday with the city council to share an overview and some of the goals and themes of things that this committee has already been working on and committed to, and got some feedback and had some questions. I thought it was a good meeting. It felt comfortable, I think, for everyone, which is important because we need to be able to be honest with each other about where we're at. And so we did talk about things, but I wanted to just say out loud that we talked about our commitment to mission, vision, and strategic priorities, which is how we set the stage when we started talking about it almost a month ago now, it feels like. Also, our multi-year planning to care for our kids and also create structures to deflect out of district placement tuition and the associated costs to it. So I know there are other items, but I think those were a couple of big takeaways for me and for the team on Monday. So we started talking about a phased approach, and more, I think people are saying, I need a visual, I want to see something. And so I can't draw to save my life. I can write all day long, but I cannot draw. I'm bad at stick people, but I can find things online. And so what I tried to do here was frame conceptually this idea of the what if piece and how long would this take and how much might this cost, using kind of a visual of a tiered diagram that steps upward in the idea that over time, while it might represent more local contribution that stays here, it would also represent growth of from way left, you're seeing starting with part of a wing and then maybe a full wing with some integration into the other parts of the school. And then maybe some point, because we keep talking about space and building and property. And as you know, we don't have a lot of schools that are big enough to just house all the kids that we currently outplace. So building this out, starting on the left, with a target of growing in-house programs to serve some students that we currently send elsewhere. So I put here that to try to grow it by 50, which would bring us to 240. I don't know if you recall, we talk about a lot of things, but Director Crafts has shared that we have 190 students that we're currently serving in-house. These are students that we might otherwise have to place elsewhere. So if we grow by 50 over the next year, making an initial investment, I put 3 million in there. It may fluctuate with what we can hire, but that target would allow us to serve 50 students and I think set the stage to grow. I think it's important to say set the stage because I think year to year, we have to have some ability to invest to be prepared for the growth. And I don't want to just do that every single year. We need to stage the prior year so that we're prepared. In year two, again, this is just a model targeting growing by another 60 students, which would put us at 300 students in-house that might otherwise be outplaced. And I put to add 2.5 should be million for a total cost of 5.5 million. So going from one year to the next, that's adding 2.5 to the prior 3. It was hard to like get all this information in a graphic that didn't just look confusing. And then so looking at that as a year 2/3 from a 25 to 27 projection. So again, growing to 300 students in-house, and part of my 2/3, I'm keeping an eye on this very other thing, but very similar thing, CDS. So when we take that on, whatever that looks like, it could happen in that time frame, or we might be gearing up in that time frame. So if we stay committed to it, we'll have to invest. But I think we have to be intentional knowing that that is absolutely coming. And then in the next set of graphic there, years 4 or 5, 28 through 29, to try to grow by another 50. And then I think when you start talking these numbers, we're no longer able to just be in schools and pockets. We'll still have things in pockets in schools, but we'll get to a place where it'll need more than a wing and integration. It will need half a building or a small building, depending on the level of need and the kids that we are able to and choosing to provide services to in-house. It may make more sense to look for ways to do that in a separate structure. So I wanted to just try to frame that in that way, and I'll answer any questions you may have. And there's lots of information behind how we got to this slide.
Member Gallant.
It's very good. Thank you. I'm like Member Bowden that it's visual. I can see it. I see that you have a little part of the wing and then it grows into the wing and then it grows into the possibly a standalone facility or building. So I like this and I appreciate you doing that. Thank you.
Member Hurd.
Thank you. So I was absent on Monday's meeting, but I did watch. And I just kind of wanted to say publicly that I think this is great because it gives the general public an idea of kind of like what we're looking at when we say we want to throw all this money at special ed, like what does that actually look like and what does that actually mean? And I also was thinking on Monday, listening to the meeting, for me, the way that I wrap my brain around it is we now have coaches, reading recovery, literacy, all of those things, because they're required for our students to be able to learn, correct? If we didn't have an option for these special private schools, we would be required to provide these services for our students. So if we just pretend like the special purpose schools were not an option, we would have to spend this money anyway. If we lived in a city or a town or somewhere that didn't have this as an option, we would have to hire these positions. We would have to have these people on staff in order to service our students properly. So I think that's also worth saying too, that we're in a unique situation here in Lewiston that we have some options around us locally that we can send our students to, but if we didn't, we would have to do this anyway. So it would have to be in our budget regardless. And so I think if we're required to provide literacy and reading recovery and math and all of those things to our students that we have now, we should also be required to provide this for our students here in our buildings if possible.
And ultimately, it's a better experience for our kids, all of them, not just the students that get to stay here. Because I think students who struggle or have these levels of disability can also enrich an environment. But I would add that I'm not making projections on cost savings in the long run, but this will definitely deflect cost. And we have a little more information about that. So I put Adam, Kirsten, and her team to a task, and ultimately we came to this point. We wanted to give you a number, so that was the visual. This is around more of a different kind of number. So we talked about the 133 students that are currently outplaced. So I wanted to focus on them, and we worked to try to find a way to put, kind of terrible to say, but to put a number on a per kid type expense. And so I want to share a couple numbers, but there's a lot of caveats here, but this was just so that we had a number to be thinking about as we work through this. In-house, in today's dollars, we project $47,000 per student in cost to have them in-house. That does include oversight. So there's APs, there's program coordinators, there's things like that. There's already people that are ours that are providing the oversight, helping with the IEPs, making sure services happen, things like that. So the second bullet is that it does include the services at that cost. It does not include transportation savings. But it also doesn't include things like, well, how much is it to keep that wing on and warm and with lights on and paper? And so those pieces are, I want to call them intangibles, but we could probably narrow it down if we had a little more time to investigate it. But those are things that are in there, not in there. When we get to the special purpose private schools in the seed, we project it out to be about $70,000 per student currently. That's to go, or to be there, I should say, daily on a piece of paper, even if they don't attend. It does not include services they receive while they're there. That's a whole other round of billing. It does not include transportation, which is very costly. And it does not include oversight, staff time, what have you. So like right now we have Jess Marr, who went from 108 kids to 133 kids that she's managing their chapter 33 meetings, their IEPs, their daily communications, what have you. We pay for that staff to just help facilitate that process because we're responsible for it. So that cost at $70,000 per student doesn't include people like that. It doesn't include our transportation director that not only do we pay big time for those services, it's our transportation people coordinating it, setting it up, making sure it runs. So there's a lot of things here not included, but there are some things included. So the 47,000 is actually, I would say, more true to a student cost, where the 70 is a low number, but I didn't want to fabricate estimates in something that could be really, really big when we're talking about a per student cost. But even that number, it's a $23,000 difference per kid. We're talking about 300 kids. That adds up in a hurry. So again, I don't want to make pretend that this will just be this massive cost savings, as soon as we look up, but there's a real chance for significant savings, but it will definitely deflect costs and allow us to provide better services. So now I want to jump to, if I can, any questions about just those pieces to have a little more foundation to it?
That cost doesn't include any facility costs, correct? It's just operating costs.
So those costs are actually just the cost of the student being there. So it wouldn't include facility cost
Okay.
for us.
Thanks.
Yep. So I'm actually going to take a second to switch screens. We're going to go to your handout, but I want to put it up on the screen for those watching at home. But to lead into just some different options. But before you dive too deep into the document, I want to tell you how I set it up because I don't know if it makes sense if I don't, but I was really trying. Okay. So we're asked to put together like packages or options or what have you. So I wanted you to be able to look straight across at the different options and not have to have three separate sheets of paper or have to flip page to page. So what we did for a structure of this is whether you look at the screen or your paper, option one in the amount is kind of like the left two columns that are paired. And then in the middle, you have option B, and it's the item and the cost. And then to the way right, you have option C, which is the item and the cost. So if you look at the very first item, I didn't plan this, this just worked out. You see elementary teacher, which is enrollment base. So again, looking at numbers, talking about enrollments, we believe we can reduce by that one position. In option B, it's also there. In option C, it's blank. So what this means is in option A, and we set this up, option A has the most reductions. Option B has a little less than A in reductions. Option C has less than B. So it goes in order. So A takes out more, B takes out a little less than A, and C takes out a little less than B. So when you see nothing, it means in that option, that item's not removed as a reduction. So if you see a blank, it's in the budget. It remains in. If you see a number, it means we have itemized that as a potential reduction within that option. These options are not written in stone or concrete. Former committee members have seen this prior where sometimes things get moved amongst options, but what we try to do in the options is build them to capture, if you will, the takeaways that we have believed we've heard in some of the different ideas. And when you work through the entire set of options, and I was going to go through it, you can see at the bottom that we have given you a total. So the number that you see at the bottom of page 3, I think, make sure I have the right page. At the bottom of page 3 represents the total reduction. So if you're seeing a thing in numbers in that option, it's potentially reduced if that option is what's chosen. As you work your way across, if you see a blank, it means it wasn't reduced in that particular option. But again, I wanted you to be able to see line by line, so you weren't just thinking, here's 30 things and what's in, what's not. So you can go line by line to see it.
Thank you. So there, oh, I don't know how to say this publicly. So there were some other options, other lines that you suggested, just to the committee, that don't appear in here. So are those, you're just taking those out, like you're going to keep those in the budget, or it's just a discussion we're going to have?
So both. So
Okay.
in some options, there are things that I would call them sensitive because you could be talking about a person's position, and some of them are built around a potential restructure, which are just not decided yet, and that's timing. That's not hiding anything. But you'll see in one spot, we have Article 5. So that's student services in our budget. So we talked about a restructure potentially in Article 5. We know we have some open roles, we have some other roles. How we might land on that at the end of the day, I think is subject to more conversation. But to your point, Member Bowden, that's in there as Article 5 as a grouping. And I think it could warrant more discussion. We did more work today with grants and what possibilities we have. So that might inform some final decisions. So it's here, but we didn't include certain detail, because I think until we get to a decision, it could be harmful to include certain detail. But discussion wise, I think we're at that point where it's very hard to walk the line of talking about a person while we're talking about the budget. But we're at that point where people will start to disaggregate who's being talked about if they're watching, and there's no other way to really have the discussion in a public way without doing that.
So my other question was, so we're sitting here looking at this tonight. If I were to say, for example, well, I like option, I'm just going to say, I like option B. Okay. But can we switch this line from option A to option B and take this out of option B? I don't know. Are we allowed to do that right now? And is that something that requires a vote from everybody?
So I would beg of you to not make it a vote from everyone. I think that to some extent there'll be compromise in this process. I know there's some things that people are passionate about, so we tried to weave that in. But ultimately, yes, you could, as a group, could say, I really don't want that in any of these options, or I want it in this option and that. We can look at those kinds of moves. You may get to a point where there's disagreement, and votes can be helpful. But I would ask for the sake of process that we don't do a ton of that. I think we might have to in some contentious items that, again, not wrong that people are passionate about it, but people are indeed passionate about it. Once upon a time, 4 years ago, there was a list of, I think, 80 of these, and they wanted to vote one at a time. And I think I learned my lesson there, that we didn't want to do that again. And so, and again, it wasn't about anybody doing anything wrong. It's hard to get agreement. And when, for better or worse, when you're forced to vote on a particular item, people can perceive that any way they wish. If you vote on a grouping and then you direct me to go solve it, I think it can be informed by the people, the department heads and the leadership and the management of the district to say, okay, if technology is an example, I had a conversation today with Director Rock. He said, and he wanted to sit and go through things right now. And I said, well, I got to do this for the committee, but he's very comfortable if I come back with one of these options being chosen and me saying to him, Mark, I need blank. I need you to inform what you think that should be from your area. And so that's a piece of that. So that's more like tech and facilities, those areas. But if we need to do that, then we'll do that. But what I won't do today is say, we put this person in blank field as a reduction. And there's still contracts and all that stuff too. So it's not about people, it's really about positions and budget.
Member Heard?
Thank you. So again, I don't know if this was talked about on Monday or not, but I had mentioned at a previous meeting about some of the special ed positions, asking if they were part of those positions that Kirsten was asking for were part of the collective bargaining agreement or not. And so I just want to make sure, where I see a lot of them on here, I want to make sure that we're being competitive enough that we're actually going to attract somebody and we're not just putting these positions in the budget, hoping that they get filled. I know we talked about like potentially I guess the word is poaching them from other locations, but I just want to make sure that we're not just putting them in here in good faith to say that we're putting them in here. I want to make sure that we're being conscious of that we're offering something competitive that we think will actually draw them here.
I mean, a couple layers to that. One is negotiations are happening, and from what I understand, we feel good about that direction. They're not done yet, so we can't say for sure. I'll also add, and as you know, because you've approved two separate things, the side agreements to move forward with trying to find ways to attract more people and keep them here. And once they get here, I think they'll just be so happy they'll stay. So that's the plan. But if does the setup make sense? Because I want to walk through and try to give a rationale for what things you're going to see and a little, nugget of information about it and let you ask questions.
Counselor Harriman?
Thank you. Also on the special ed positions, I guess I'm just wondering, looking at the first column, which is option A, if we cut that many from the budget, is that going to be feasible to accomplish the plans that we hope to accomplish?
It's a good question. I would say option A would make it harder, but not impossible. And then you'll see in B and C, which I think has been informed by both city and school, but in B and C, we reduced far less of these special education positions, which drives up the cost. So it's less of a reduction. So, but to your point, option A does have more of the special ed reductions. I think it still reflects more of what I feel like is reality tempered with what we want, without being able to see into the future. So I'm actually just going to go line by line. I'll cruise through. We can return to anything. If you have a question as I go, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm sure there will be questions. So that first line again on the sheet is based on enrollments. There's some spots where enrollments are light, and we believe from a leadership perspective that we could reduce by an elementary teacher. We would do our best to position that in the smartest way possible, and still be able to serve kids with reasonable class sizes. The next one is McMahon. They actually have a vacant position that they believe they could live without. Never easy. They want to keep it, but it's vacant and currently not providing services to students. The next line is the ELL or multilingual language facilitator increase. We've talked about this prior, but we talked about a lot. So that was money that I had put in to the budget before we got the new allocation and then hired the cultural brokers. So those folks will actually be able to do, because they work year round, these things. So we don't need that in the budget from my perspective. The subline reduction, this is the regular education. You can see that was a reduction of 320,000. We doubled that line. This is about 2/3 of that doubling. Again, hopeful that will work out. LHS teachers, we left that out all the way across because those were positions that didn't exist before. We know we had an enrollment bump this year, and we didn't have to scramble, but we started to have conversations about, if I get another 25 kids, I'm not sure where we're going to put them. So we did start to have conversations with long-term subs and things like that, just in case. That item was placed in the budget again in probably January when we were working on it. I said, it'd be nice to have a couple of positions, no matter where they're needed in the district, that we could act on it. And, we could take it to you and you could say, it's in the budget, go ahead and do it. So that pulls those. SRO, you can see in option A that we reduced by 2, and that's $166,000 savings. And you can see in option B and C, we left 1 in. I think we got some feedback that'd be nice to have 1 at least. And so in options B and C, that's in, and that one may prompt more discussion for sure. Yeah.
And just to be clear, this is option A would be reducing the 2 new ones that were added to the budget. It wouldn't be changing the existing 3, and then
Correct.
B
Yeah.
and C accordingly.
Yes, thank you for pointing out. I should have said that. This is additional. We have 3 currently. A few years back, we had 4. They struggled to fill one of them. LPD is in a better position currently. So this would be going from 3 to 4 if you adopted option B or C, or further debated that item. Next step, busing. Again, we have a kind of a plan A in place now where students walk up, whether we run vans, which also has an associated cost, but to bring, the big buses to the school every day from all over the city it was roughly a $79,000 increase. We think we can continue to run on the plan that we have. You know, their enrollment is over 100 kids. It does limit some of the things they wish to do because of how they have to fetch students at different times, but it works for now. I think long-term, I'd like to figure that out, but hard one in this budget. The family medical leave contributions, we got a little more clarity. I know we've talked about that a few times, but some of that can just be a deduction in a paycheck. So we felt it safe to just take $100,000 out of that 382 in that it can just be a deduction in paycheck. That's what the law was set up to do. We didn't take full half of it because we want to see what the language actually reads at the end, and there's room for negotiation down the road. The special ed tuition increase, this is hedging the reserve, hoping that we don't have to use it in the current year to reduce by $500,000 in the budget, knowing that we have a reserve if we need to spill into that to cover it. Ideally, if we do some of the things that we're saying we want to do, some of that will be deflected by kids being here and not elsewhere. Sublines, I know you've seen this twice a number of times. I put labels on them this time. This is the special ed line. We reduced this, but not quite as much as the regular ed line. Wanted to make sure that we could provide the services that we need to provide. Director Kraft requested a special ed CDS coordinator. This would be an administrative level like position. This person would help facilitate all things CDS. Again, put in early thinking this is coming. We got to be eyes up on it. Not that there's not still a lot of transition work that has to happen. But this position until we have CDS. Sorry, I just moved my screen. Until we have the CDS transition happening or about to happen, I think we can get by without that particular role. So that's option A, but you can see in B and C, I didn't take it out because we do still have anticipated 100 kids next year that we will be trying to navigate and figure out how to best provide for them. Special ed, actually this whole next section is special ed. So the LHS LMS speech position, that's a new request. I was trying to pull out which school, leaving room for Director Crafts to build out a program. And so these are essential positions. What level they're at are things that we're hopeful to have some discretion on so we can try to build it out. But you can see another speech position, an OT, multiple clinicians, and an outplacement coordinator. And you can see how some things are still in, some things are still out in B and C. And just to touch on those, one of the special ed clinicians I left out in B and C, and in my mind, that's about that hiring ability. Could we hire that many or could we not?
Member Glant?
So does this account for the inability for us to find or hire anybody on the speech side,
Yes.
speech pathology?
So the items I remained out, which are less than A, were based on, again, my thinking of, I don't think we'll be able to hire those
Right.
folks.
Right, and they've been on the books for a while, right?
Mhm. Yep.
Okay.
Member Bowden?
Thank you. Well, a couple things and then a question. First of all, I think the CDS coordinator is a very important position. If we're talking about this happening next year, I don't see how we can cut that out of our budget. And you know, there seems to really be a need for another speech at LHS and LMS. And if we can hire somebody, I think we should. I did star those two positions specifically. And then I'm also concerned about the outplacement coordinator because clearly we have a lot of kids that we outplace. Do we not have anybody that coordinates this currently?
So we have one person who does it full-time currently.
And
This position would be to add to the capacity to do that.
And where we can't keep all these kids in-house, it sounds like there's a need for this because it's overwhelming. Like there's just a lot to coordinate as far as
Yes.
transportation and the services they're getting. And okay, so that kind of seems like an important one too. And I'm not really sure why you put it in every line to remove it. I don't understand. Do you not think we can fill that?
Because there's a bottom line.
Right. But do you not think we could fill that position?
Oh, I think we could probably fill that. Yes.
Would that position help create less stress for our director?
I'm gonna go with the yes. She's sitting behind me. I can't even see her, but it's a yes. It's a yes.
Okay, thank you.
Member Heard.
I think all of these positions will help her feel less stressed.
Thank you. I'm assuming this special ed outplacement coordinator, that's a full-time position, correct?
Yes. And this would be working with the existing outplacement coordinator to help
Right,
with the.
so I'm saying, okay, can we meet in the middle and say we'll offer it as a like a part-time position? Like, even if you give them her part-time, you're taking some of that away, right? I mean, I understand you saying like you want to take it away because, and I see both sides of it. So we're doing all these things and we're hiring all of these people so that we have less kids outplaced. So hopefully some of those kids drop off from the outplacement list because they will then be in-house. I understand that whole side of it as I'm playing devil's advocate here. But at the same, this isn't going to be an instant thing.
Right, it wouldn't be instant. Again, we can debate these lines. I'm not saying we can't. I think that there are things on here that are going to be wanted in other areas. I did try to reach a target of getting under or around 10 for an additional request over last year, which I still think is a big number to ask for community. So it's one of those things of if not that, then when. The other thing I would say is some of these positions, whether the title or responsibility somewhat shifts as we try to get things more in-house, these are things that you would see next year as we continue to try to grow.
Member Glant.
So given that if we have a plan to eventually get as many students back in-house, the need for a outplacement coordinator should drop, I would think. So it could be a temporary position, given that over the, 20, what did we say, 27, 28 FY.
Yeah, I think it was 26, 27 that we were trying to get
Yeah.
some transition. So, but yeah, to your point, I think until we have things established and can do that. Don't forget, we have 50 kids on a waiting list. So these numbers could not shift dramatically next year as far as outplacement is concerned, but it could mean that we are placing more in-house. It's still saving, but we have a hill to climb.
Member Heard.
Thank you. Is there an opportunity if these other like clinicians or OT or speech or whatever, those positions don't get filled, is there an opportunity to add the outplacement coordinator in there? Like, is that something that you can do? Is that something you have to come to us and say, hey, we want to create this position. Can we do this and move money? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So kind of both things can happen depending on the role. So like we have an unfilled teacher position, but we need a BHP. I approve those. Director Kraft will bring them to me. We'll review it, make sure the budget's all sound and do it. So there are some unbudgeted items that do pop up in special ed because of the legalities of meeting them. Anything coordinator level, I would bring to you. But it's the kind of thing that I could see her bringing of, here's what we're projecting, here's what I think we need right now. One thing I really appreciate about her, amongst others, is that she keeps that pulse on things, trying to make sure we're not burning everybody out. So, but yes, feasible.
Member Eames.
I see later on, there's a portion of career, maybe experience or exposure teacher. So is there a way to have a portion of an outplacement coordinator?
Not that I know of yet. And so the reason I would struggle with an outplacement coordinator not being full-time because of the dynamics of the job. I could see some others maybe, but I also wonder if we'd be able to fill it part-time or what that would look like. Right. No, I mean, I get that perspective. I don't know of any adults that are going to jump into that specifically part-time when the scenarios are what they are out there, but definitely possible. You never know. The further down the items that we'll get to are portion of, because we're using grants to pay for part. And so it's a full-time role, but the reduction is a partial.
Member Bowden?
So obviously you have 6 special ed clinicians on this list, kind of on the chopping block. And I'm curious, how many did Director Crafts ask for that you originally put on the budget?
My brain wants to say 10, but clinicians overall, was it 10? 10.
Okay, so she asked for 10, so you're giving her 4. And
Well, it
maybe,
depends on what option you choose.
right. But what I'm saying is she asked for 10, so you left 4 off this list altogether that are going to stay on the budget. Correct?
Right,
Okay.
from option A. Is that what you're asking?
In
Because,
addition to option A, there's
In
4 more that
addition,
are still.
there's
in
a
the budget.
4
Oh,
more
yes,
that are
sorry.
new. Okay.
I did these numbers all day long.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure that we were not like
Right, so this is,
potentially getting rid of every clinician that she asked for.
correct. So there are
Okay.
4 in the budget, not on this, not part of this conversation, that are new.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you think we can fill those?
I'm hopeful to fill those 4. But again, clinicians have been a hard area to hire for.
Okay. That was my question. Thank you.
I was just trying to find it, but I can't. I read an article today about CDS and the conversations that they're having. And that what I read said that the roll-in would be by 2029. So I don't know that do we need the CDS coordinator now if we still have that much time before?
So,
Yes.
so because we're such a big district, we have so many kids that whether CDS is in play in full yet as for the district or not, we have 100 kids that have the highest levels of need and are the youngest in our population, most vulnerable. So that's why I could see that one maybe surviving. Again, if we could have it all, we would. But the CDS coordinator position is slated to be a phase. And the other thing with CDS coordinator position, I do think it's big enough to do it now, and kids will probably be better served now, without diving into too much, maybe political wind. There's a sense that some providers absolutely freight the IEP without other people in the room so they can bill for those services. If you're more involved in the CDS process earlier, you can ensure kids, one, aren't not getting their services, and that some kids who may not need the service aren't getting an IEP for it. One of the things that school districts have complained about statewide are that they receive kids that are 4 years old that have IEPs that require more services than any kid in public schools. And it seems like after a few years that some of the services weren't necessary. So that's part of a bigger context. And again, I don't want to get into a who did what type scenario, but if we have our own people on the ground, it actually could save money to appropriately provide services for kids. Some kids who never get in to see anyone to get diagnoses because there's a limited amount of staff, it might be being bumped by someone trying to provide more services for a kid who doesn't need them just to have the one kid and bill for it all. Sorry for all like the weird context of it, but when you do the billing piece, if you provide OT, PT, speech, you can bill for all those services. Your reimbursement is greater. So if you're tuition or being paid for a service as a site, you can also bill for more things. If you run a special purpose private school, CDS, young kids or otherwise, the best kid you could have, and this is terrible to say, I just please forgive me after I say this. The best kid you could have is shows up daily, doesn't cause any issues, requires every service you can imagine, and goes home with a smile. That's the best kid an outplacement or a service provider could ask for, because you can bill all kinds of things. That's going to bring the most money and the less friction to your organization. But part of what we're finding now is some places will try to hold on to those kids and provide all those services because they show up, they don't cause big issues, so pleasant, check the boxes for the services, fill out the timesheet for the intervals, and submit it for billing, and then we pay the seed share. And so these are kids that we could probably manage in our schools that we're not even seeing. So sorry to just go down a rabbit hole around CDS, but I could see the CDS coordinator being beneficial to the district in a quicker turnaround. But again, there's a bottom line.
Member Eames?
They're talking about the actual language tomorrow in Augusta. I just read the draft. I gave it to Kirsten. And yeah, it's very troubling what I read. So we can talk about that at another time, but the outside time we could put it all in place is 2029, July 2029, because you can beg an extra year. But it sounds like we have to coordinate the current kids we already have before that program gets put in place anyway. So I guess I would worry about getting rid of this job, but that's based on having read what I read.
Kirsten gets a stack of boxes in her office annually. These are the kids that are looking like they're going to be entering it from CDS. So it's not just the 3 and 4 year olds, it's also the 5 and 6. It's when they land here. We try to get in observations at the sites where they currently receive services. That doesn't always happen, not to the effect that it should have. Parents, I think, can be feeling more comfortable about a current placement than transitioning to public school for lots of reasons, but one of them being, did someone actually go to that meeting, or were they not there because we don't have anyone to be at that meeting to talk about what a transition would look like? Do we have the program that could provide the level of support and need, like year-round services that kids sometimes require? So all those pieces build into even a parent's resistance to saying, I want to look for something different for my child. So again, there are some that are very much driven by profit.
So the wording in in the law that they're going to talk about tomorrow is all about how they're going to cover everything, no problem, 100%, even more. But then the budget is only $10 million for the entire state. So I don't understand the way those go together. So that's what's troubling to me.
My understanding is the intent is to leave the CDS coordinator for the region in place. So that's one person to help coordinate services for the entire region. And I mean, I don't know that one person is enough to coordinate Lewiston, never mind the region. So it's definitely got some challenges in it. I will say the Department of Ed has done what I think is good diligence on trying to find a way to make this feasible with money behind it instead of being unfunded. But I think the biggest barrier for the state to try to do this effectively is a lack of staff. Well, it's not like we just have the staff and aren't sharing them. I mean, so that's the challenge overall, and hopefully that will improve by 29. And I think 29 is proposed as that you don't have a choice date. They are looking for schools and systems that will integrate sooner, and I think they're trying to incentivize that, which may be beneficial to improving a space or
Actually,
having some lead funds to get people in and trained and certified and ready to roll.
28 is the normal time you can beg an extra year. Yeah.
I found the article that I was reading earlier. It says that schools that don't already have pre-K can partner under this proposal, can partner with local public or private preschools that have classroom space available, and a private provider that can't find enough teachers due to low pay could get support from the local public school district to hire at a higher pay rate. Does that mean we would essentially be paying teachers to work in private daycares? Is that really what it sounds like?
So there's a piece of that. So we have pre-K, so we might land in a different place where it could get, I don't know how much time you want to talk about this. Yeah. I've been integrally involved in a number of meetings, as has Karen, in other places of the state where they don't have pre-K, and the state's made an effort over the last couple of years to make sure there's pre-K in more and more places and finding a way to integrate that. The goal is to have public pre-K, or at least some kind of funding for pre-K statewide for every kid who wants to be there. State law still doesn't require it. It's not a compulsory requirement. But there are other districts that they don't have the space, they can't find the staff, and they're so rural and spread out that the idea of putting a very young child on a bus and bringing them to school, 45 minutes one way, an hour one way, an hour and a half, I heard in one place one way, is a pretty tough ask. And so part of it was looking at like preschool structures that have good routines and structures. I mean, Janet does this as part of what she does as an educator. Their programming could be received as or understood as potentially pre-K like. So it's preschool, like CDS level pre-K like. And then, so there's a question around how could you fund that, which might be supported through CDS funding model connected to pre-K and or preschool, but also there's a big question about services. So do you care if I use this example? So Janet's at work and she's working with a student who's qualified and has a need for, let's say, physical therapy. But you can hire a traveling physical therapy provider who might go from location to location to provide physical therapy. Does that meet the letter of the law? It's still being debated at the federal level. The other one is, can parents waive their rights to have certain services as long as they can get into like a preschool that will also focus on, well, we know the student would benefit from PT-like activities. Can parents sign a waiver to keep their kids there versus being told your kid has to go to pre-K or to another CDS location? So that's another part of this conversation. They're still talking to the federal government about that from reimbursement and costs. So some of that's woven into, like, woven is the word of the year, I'm sorry. But it's all built into what's permissible, what's reimbursable. And again, I do think DOE is doing everything they can to try to make it a possibility.
So when it says schools that don't currently have pre-K, it means school districts, not individual schools?
Right.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
okay, thank you. Member Glant?
Yeah, this is a question. It's probably a long shot. But as we discussed, what we are able to pay here in school for clinicians is much lower than what is paid in the community. My question is, if we could take fewer clinicians, but raise their income, I mean, that would be a possibility of getting quality people in to fill these positions. If we could move, like, if we're asking for 10, but we say we take 5 or 6 and take those other 3 or 4 positions and add the extra pay to those that are actually doing the job. Is that even a possibility?
So it would have to be negotiated because they are part of our collective bargaining agreement for our certified professional educators. But again, our association has been willing to have those conversations. And part of our thinking is when you see salaries at the school level, you see the salary based on 175 school days and your professional development days for a total of 182, Bill? 182 days is what the salary is for. But when we have special purpose private programs or bringing kids back from them, those students have what's called ESY, extended school year services. It's written into their IEP. They go to school in the summer. A lot of students, especially if they have physical disabilities, can regress a great deal if they don't have services in the summer. So one of the things we're already looking at is there a way for us to look at the contract, either do it within the contract, or if it can't be done, how else could we do it? To have year-round high needs special salaries, but these people, when they take the job, would know that they're working year-round. But it creates other gaps too. So, but they'd be able to take a week off whenever, or within reason, which is not the same for teachers. So there's a lot of crossover, but there's a lot of not crossover. But to my point is, we could have a teacher that works during the year. That's their salary. So they can say, well, I get paid this. But if they also work the summer and make another $10,000, $12,000, $15,000, that doesn't always get talked about amongst people when they talk about what they make as a teacher, but the actual compensation is there. But if you're trying to attract staff that do work in a year-round facility, like some of these local folks that we send people to, they think about what they make and then they see their salary and they're like, I can't change jobs. When really they could make that maybe more working for the public school system if they want to work summers. The problem we've had before is we can't obligate summer work as part of the contract because it's 182 days. What we're exploring is what's the conversation if we get this budget that's focused on this effort? What's the conversation around how do we get that? How do we either create it within the existing contract or create something else?
Member Bowden?
Thank you. So just a couple things. So just some clarity with this CDS thing. It's not rolling out until 2029. What I'm hearing is that, and I want to make sure I'm correct on this, that it's sort of a concept draft right now, and they're talking about it being a voluntary thing within school districts for the first 3 years and then possibly turning into a mandate. Okay. And so when would we know if it's going to be a mandate? And do you plan on voluntarily entering into this?
I will bring that to you if we choose to volunteer, but there's some incentives to volunteer. So because of our size, we've considered it. We've also considered a regional approach. So much needs to happen with this decision-making process, but where I sit right now, didn't read that article, but just being involved, my understanding is this is likely to pass. You'll have a 3-year window. Voluntary folks have already been named for next year, or at least in concept, and they're looking for other people to volunteer sooner than later and incentivizing it. So would we volunteer? I want to know what the incentives are and what the law is, but we may consider it because
Can we
we're
handle that?
already, well, part of it is we're already responsible for those kids when they come in our door. So that's the piece. So when we talk about the coordinator position, did I reduce it? Sure. The law's still being made, but if we go voluntary, we need that and something.
Yeah, it just sounds kind of messy where where it's still in a concept phase and it's not mandated. If we were to just simply like, I volunteer, let's do this. It just seems messy when we're in a budget situation like this and we're talking about all these like reductions.
I don't intend to volunteer.
Okay, well,
currently.
thank you. All right, that's what I need to hear. So my next question, kind of moving on to this special ed one-on-one ed tech. Is there a reason that we're removing that? Because that sounds like a pretty important position. If a child needs a one-on-one ed tech, like why would we be removing that if there's a need for it?
Yeah, so I think that was one of 5. But so there's still 4 in there. But it's also the kind of thing where you might see some moving parts. If we go this direction where we want to build out this 50 student potential, there may be a need for additional ed techs. But again, I think in these proposals, I think we're trying to build capacity to move what we need to, what we can hire and try to provide some services.
And then one last question, do we typically fill these one-on-one special ed tech positions as they come up, or do they sit vacant?
I don't, you might want to check Kirsten, but these almost happen in waves. It's like we can't find anyone for a while and then we get 3. Or we go to move one and 2 people say, I'll do it. And then we go dry for 2 or 3 months and we can't find anyone. So I would say I wouldn't call it a stable area, but I think we're able to hire them more so than some of the other positions, like clinicians, better than a clinician scenario.
Are the clinician positions a 6-hour workday?
I think the CPE is 7.5.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, 7. Because they get lunch. All right, sliding down, we get away from some of the special education positions with, I left it as Farwell, because this is one of those Easter positions that we said it to people when we hired them. We've been saying it every year since. Do I want it? Sure. But we knew this was a temporary position. We hope to get as much out of it as we can. So you can see that it's in for a reduction in parts A and B, but not in C. So it might be an area you want to go. I should note that there are 2 intervention positions that do this kind of work at Farwell, and Principal Bard thinks he can put 1 in title, maybe. It depends on what our title allocation is, and we don't have that yet.
So that was kind of my question. I just wanted to reiterate, like the reading recovery teacher sounds like an important position. Also, is that something that we can add into Title I funds, even if that means like kind of swapping for something else in Title I? Can we add that into Title I?
Could be paid for with Title I. We want to be careful not supplanting. In this particular case, we wouldn't be because the ESER in that position is no longer funded. If it was in our general fund, we can't just put it back into title because we want to. That's a violation of federal law.
Member Gallant, sorry.
So are the reading recovery programs, are they identified through IEP as well? and they don't come under special ed.
No, those don't come into special ed. In fact, it's part of the process trying to get kids up to speed before they are identified as special ed. So this is when we talk about MTSS or multi-tiered systems of support, having reading, math intervention, those kinds of things are part of seeing if a kid actually needs to be identified with a learning disability, or if they're just a little behind and they can get caught up and be with their peers.
Member McLaughlin?
I was just curious why this one, the cost is a little over $100,000 versus some of the other teaching positions that are more around 75.
Yep. So that one reflects an actual. And when we see huge jumps in an individual, it's usually because of insurance. So if a person doesn't take our insurance because their spouse or somebody else has it versus someone who takes full family. So it's not commonly talked about, but the district invests, $20,000+ per staff just for health insurance. So it's a significant cost. So my guess is that person may be more experienced and also has insurance. Got my mic off and looked around. Then they have, sorry, with the Dean of Students, which many people have expressed support for because the middle school seems to be running more smoothly and improving. And part of that model is having what is a second Dean of Students. That is another ESER position that has been in place for a couple of years. Those funds are sunsetting. Next ESER one is Geiger Interventionist. I know there were some folks here that were interested in seeing that stay. It's one of the few things that Principal Gish asked for. So you can see that it's removed in A, but remains in B and C.
Sorry, to go back to the middle school dean of students. Again, I wasn't here on Monday, but I know Amanda had talked a little bit about the things that they're doing there around restorative justice and stuff like that. What other positions are there other restorative justice positions at the middle school that are also kind of like doing the same work? So like, let's say we took out the dean of students. There are clearly other people there that are going to continue to do the same work, correct or no?
So at the middle school, they have their administrative team. They have 2 deans of students. And then I think the only other thing that they have, I know the only thing they have an ISS room that's used very differently than, say, closing the loop on the restorative effort.
James Ford was there in a restorative justice role, but he's gone now, so that is gone.
That was an ESER sunset item last year. We actually discontinued that role. It was ESER paid, but it was one of the prior expiring funds.
We do have another dean of students though, and we also have counselors there, correct?
There's 1 or 2 at this point. There was 1 school counselor, Karen told me there's 2. So they do have school counselors.
Okay.
And when I say 1, now there's 2. They had 2 budgeted. They struggled to find one for a while.
So when you say we close the loop, we're not closing the loop though, because that will still be happening there. Like there will still be restorative practices happening. It would just be with one less dean of students. There would still be 1 dean of students and there's still counselors there that regularly work on restorative things, correct?
I would say that there's still school counselors, but those school counselors are dealing with very separate type items, more heavy on mental health and student safety type scenarios. I'm not saying that they couldn't be involved in restorative, but that's not I wouldn't even say it's in their top 5.
But it's like exclusively what a dean of students does is restorative work.
Yeah, I mean, I still don't love the word dean. These are the peacekeepers, right? So they see the baseline of a kid coming in, try to be preventative in efforts, get kids to get along. Hopefully they can stay in school, those kinds of things. But yeah, it's restorative is what they try to do after something happens, but they're trying to do more preventative.
In the current, the LMS dean that we would talk about eliminating understands this was a temporary position with COVID funds?
We said it to everyone we hired through ESER dollars.
Okay. Thank you.
Member Hurd?
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, we're kind of staying on the track of like these ESER positions, we're kind of putting them on the chopping block at this point. And I'm wondering if maybe Amanda and her team have done a lot of work over the last year, that everybody's kind of familiar with different practice and protocols, and they're seeing the way that things work with students that, maybe they could function without this dean of student positions. And it's also a possibility that if, something changes, we could always put it back. Like if we look and say, okay, this clearly isn't working, or we see a shift or we see a change, we could always, put it back in next year's budget. I just, what's the
If,
why one ESER position over another?
well, so the ESER positions that you see on here are the ones that are left out of 40. We've reduced by all of them otherwise. If Principal Bryant were here, she would tell you that of all of the things that could be reduced and all the things that we have, I need that other dean. She has said that to me numerous times, and we meet and we have, I would say, productive, but not always pleasant conversations when I say, all right, folks, we're all in a room. This is what I'm looking to get at for a target. And here's some things I've identified. And every time, and she does it respectfully, I need that dean. She has said that now 3 separate times.
We haven't cut all of the ESER positions that are, we've absorbed a lot of those, right? Last year we absorbed a bunch as they were sunsetting.
So most of what has been absorbed has either been, if we've had people leave the position, we never filled the position. So we have a handful that happened over the last couple of years, and even at the beginning of this year. There's also a handful that we were able to reallocate to some other grants that we got. So we received a mental health grant and then an SEL grant. And there's a couple of the positions from ESER in the SEL realm of things that was added to the budget last year. So you're right in that aspect. But the majority of the ESER positions were either not filled when they were vacated, or we've absorbed them through other funds, not into the local budget.
But we haven't cut humans.
So we did have a couple last year that we didn't. So when James Ford was mentioned, that position sunsetted. We didn't have the funds to move forward with that. That was a position that a person was in that we didn't keep the funds.
Floating nurses, there was I think a grade level teacher at one point. And there had been some other, but that was actual people in it doing the job. I think it resulted in, I want to say there was somewhere between 4 and 6 last year that were transfers, that the position was reduced and they transferred to other roles. I mean, we've been fortunate to have vacancies and lots of needs, so people don't end up, without work, but
We have a handful of positions as well that our people are in currently, and they were not even brought to the original budget for the superintendent to even bring to you. So there are people that already know that after this year, you no longer have this ESER position, so we'll be looking to move them to something else.
Member Eames?
I think it was executive session, so I can't say what was said or who said it, but there was quite a bit of defense of this job, this particular slot. And suddenly it's gone and I don't understand. The dean.
so it's removed in option A, but it's remains in B and C, if that's what the committee chooses to do.
I think that the dean, out of all of, they're all important, but the dean at Lewiston Middle School is one of the biggest things on here as far as maintaining. We've talked about how we've seen a reduction of discipline hearings and a reduction of student behaviors at the middle school and less fights and all of that. And I attribute that, from being in the school and witnessing stuff, I attribute that almost 100% to the dean positions. And I don't know that one would be able to do as good of a job among both grades as two can manage that many students with that much chaos.
Yeah, middle school kids are definitely tricky. The next couple items, you can see portion of career exploration and portion of LRTC assistant director. That is by portion, Director Callahan's looked at Perkins grant criteria and thinks that he can move some things around to pay for those short term. Part of that hope is when we do the regional conversation that some additional funds will be raised by other schools to contribute to the satellite piece and the growing program. So that's part of those roles. They would remain, but we would be responsible for some and some would be grant.
Member Bowden?
Yeah, sorry. Could you kind of just like elaborate on how that would work? Like, I obviously know that we get state subsidy for LRTC, and our LRTC includes 5 school districts, 6 school districts. And now I know that we've gotten more because of our Auburn campus, that is still technically ours. Are we asking other school districts to give us some of their subsidy? Like those 5 other school districts, not including Auburn, because we're getting Auburn, I get that. But like Oak Hill and Turner and like all of these other places, are they giving us some of their state subsidy to fund our LRTC program?
So it's a good question. So if
Yeah,
you look
well-
at the ED 279, we have in one of those sections, it says career and technical education. And for us, there's a big subsidy line to it. Other districts in our region don't even have that line. They do not get subsidy for CTE at all. They are required by law to provide certain things like transportation, access. They have to commit to a number of days on the calendar, which is why that's always a hard thing to shift, amongst other reasons. So they don't actually get subsidy for CTE. And while there was an article, as I read through it, there were some things in there that I think were extrapolated from a meeting that are not factual. I think they were said, but I don't think that they were factual. Things like if we pay more, we get more seats. That's not real. The allocation is decided by the region. It's a state function. And it's connected to hosting and all of those things. So more money doesn't get you more things. What we're saying is there's a cost to this. There's additional transportation, there's additional facility, there's additional seats, there's additional supplies, and the state subsidy doesn't cover all of it. For many years, Lewiston has just floated that. And what I'm saying to the region and Director Callahan is part of the conversation, because he's kind of the lead of that, but as am I guess, from the perspective that it lives in this budget, we're saying we've gotten big enough and Lewiston has absorbed enough of this over time that it's time to look at our cooperative agreement to say some portion of your seats has to have a contribution because subsidy doesn't cover it. And if Lewiston doesn't help budgetarily take care of that, it would result in the loss of programs, but it would also result in the loss of subsidy. So we would be hurt by that here, but also as a region.
Okay, because thank you for clarifying that, because I just want like the public to understand that. But I also, in my mind, I know that our program is big enough here and successful enough here that we could fill all of our seats in-house with Lewiston students and now Auburn students because we have an Auburn campus. So I get it. Like it's kind of a tough pill to swallow. And I'm just wondering why other school districts don't have their own LRTC type programming at their schools. Like,
And that's why, because they don't get subsidy. So they'd have to pay for it on their own. So schools within a region that have their own programming, they made a conscious choice to fund that. Auburn actually Yale had an early childhood, I think, program, and they worked with Central Maine Community College for a while. I think they still do it. I don't know, but they funded that entirely locally. That was just their choice. And so to that end, there's things like that Lewiston could do. You could decide to have another program, at a shop. Don't make it part of the CTE model. You could teach welding as a school district if you want to take on that cost in that program, but you lose the subsidy. The subsidy it's big. It's in the millions. All right. Moving on, you see a tech vacancy or other. That's one of those areas where I want to talk to Mark. I wouldn't just take a vacancy. I'd want to know what else could we do? Is it software? Is it, cabling? Is it what else could be there that we could reduce by? The elementary athletics stipends, we've talked about those. Those have been unused for multiple years. Could we use that for programming? Of course, but where it's been unused, it almost feels new. Montello after school, we talked about considering the structure of that. So it's in option A. I don't love it because some of the other pursuits are going to be more timely for next year, like 21st Century Grant, which we'll explore. LMS, there's two positions that are enrollment based. This was part of that conversation with Principal Bryant of, I would rather give up this than lose my dean. Sometimes I take more than what you prefer. This is one of those items, but I think because it's enrollment based and it's a real projection, it could be lived without, so you see that stays in all three of the proposals. Article 5 restructure, which we've talked about, just a couple open positions and some other positions that currently exist, providing services I think everybody wants, but could we restructure to save any funds there? That's on there. You can see that it reduces in B and C. Different configurations of restructure is why that is there. HR advertising, that was a savings. I think that's pretty straightforward. The teacher laptops, again, this was about the teacher refresh. I kept that reduction across the board. I think it's between looking for other funds or just having to delay it. I think it's, when we talk bottom lines, it's a hard one. LMS stipends was a correction, but it resulted in a $20,000 fine. Thank you, Adam. You earned your money. Special education summer school, that's based on actuals, if you recall that. So we left that in all the way across. It doesn't change our programming. IT software, Vercada is actually the software that runs the camera systems, the new camera systems. So it's in there because of how we structured that purchase. We actually don't need that software amount. Mark earned his money on that one. Facilities and building, building and maintenance, LRTC. We have money in an account for that. Between, I think, them being resourceful and having a little less need because of subsidy or other grants, that money has been underspent several years in a row. So that's more built on actuals. Same with operation of building. Student transportation, a couple years back, they acquired one bus and then another. But we also have some vans that run. So we put some money in account that these things might need maintenance at some point. We've actually never touched that line. In part, the maintenance that they can do is part of their programming. So that's a little more cost friendly for us. And we think it's safe to cut half of that. LHS co-curricular equipment, that was more built on an actual. Equipment is a reduction, but that is more educational equipment. And it's a whole litany of things, big and small, from I want a new device in my lab to adding a device in my lab to tables, chairs, those kinds of things. We spent a lot of money on tables, chairs, things like that during COVID because it was permissible. So I feel like we still want to create that rotation, like a 5-year thing or a 10-year thing where we are refreshing. There's still money in equipment. This is a reduction.
Member Eames?
That just made me think of the lab question and where that stands, because people have been hot about that, but then it sort of disappeared from our conversation. So what's up?
So the latest with the lab is it's still an LCIP request that might still go for part of that. And we are looking at revolving funds and grants. As long as it meets their priority, because the state sets that criteria, we will apply for that. Flooring replacements, we've talked about these, but there's a number of spots where the floors could be replaced. But I think given this budget and some of the targets that were shared with us, we felt like we could reduce there. So you see option A includes a $4.49 million reduction, option B, 3.7, and option C, 3.2. And if you scroll to I'm sorry, I'm scrolling. If you flip to the next page, you can see this is where, when I was trying to explain this to people earlier, I want to make sure I explain how I did this. So the increase that you see in each of these respective areas is with the reductions calculated. So we took remember that first day we got into that multicolored sheet with the revenues and it said, $13 million increase. So we took these reductions, did the math on that. So the increase from option A puts the budget at an increase of $9.389 million. The increase in option B puts it at 10.11. Option C, 10.6. So from kind of left to right, option A cuts the most. Option B cuts less than A. Option C cuts less than B. And we also put in the estimated cost using the formula from the sheet on a $150,000 home, the mill rate, the percentage increase on the local, and the percentage increase on the budget as a whole in each of these various options. So you can see those.
I have a question.
Mhm.
With Article 5 bundled, because we don't want to talk about specific positions, how can we talk that out more? Because it shows it's with the,
One strategy would be to leave it alone for now. And taking some time to look at some options on that specifically. My encouragement would be to do that in the executive session because you'd be
Okay.
talking about people directly.
Yep.
Um,
I think we need to do that though, because I think
Yeah.
that contains a lot of really important things for our students, and I
Mhm.
don't want it to just get bundled and cut in a bundle, and then we're losing things that we need and without realizing it.
Yeah, and again, one strategy there, so at the very bottom of the sheet, actually I started at the top with saying, I'll read it to you, but just tonight our goal is to come to some consensus and vote to approve a budget amount to present to the city council. We have optional meetings after this if we need them. I don't know how fruitful that will be, but I work for you, so I will be wherever you need me. But what you could do is say something to the effect of, we need you to bring something back to us on that. But from a budgetary perspective, you could approve a number tonight or at the next meeting. Again, I'm not trying to be forceful. I just want to be mindful of people's commitments. But from where I landed, and again, I'll do all the Q&A, but there's a number of lines to consider. Some moves or changes could be made. In some areas, we'll bring leadership back in to see what specific reductions will be made. To that point, we may have something we can pay for with a grant that we're just waiting to hear that, yes, that's permissible. So it might inform like that Article 5 conversation for restructure. We continue to look at possibilities, again, grants, restructuring, but please note if there are any changes, we'll keep you informed. As you recall, one example of this is the health insurance number. So we're supposed to hear about a cap very soon and then get an actual within a couple weeks. That actual, if it's lower than what we projected, we'll let you know that that's a potential reduction right away. If it comes in higher than projected, we'll let you know that if you want to stay at your number, we have to find things to cut. But we'd keep you posted on that. I mean, my recommendation, trying to think of the whole thing, based on the options, would be option A. It represents the largest decrease, and I know that may not be popular with everyone. But I do think as an educator, I could get behind option A, trying to base myself in realities and cost structures. But I also know that as an educator, I can get behind any of these. As an educator, I could get behind not doing any reductions. I think our kids have a high level of need, and if we can find a way to do it, we should. But I'm still mindful of people going to a ballot box and casting a vote and knowing that there's an impact to them too.
Member Bowden? Oh, sorry, Scott.
Thank you. So, I always say it and I'm going to say it again. I do trust you. I trust your judgment. I know you put a lot of thought into this. And while I don't love option A, I'm comfortable with it with a couple of changes. And first and foremost for me, it would be not eliminating both of those SRO positions. I'm really hard set on keeping one of those SRO positions coming into our district, just because we're so large, and 3, in my opinion, just isn't enough, especially when we're talking about elementary school. So I would like to see that one SRO position. So 88,000, right? And then I'm still having a hard time with the special ed. Like I know I said it in executive, but I'll say it out loud. Like I'm kind of all in on special ed, is if it's going to save us money in the long run. I really want to see our special ed program grow to the point where we are servicing students in-house and we're not spending outlandish dollars on transportation and private schools, special private schools. So, in the spirit of compromise, I really think that CDS coordinator position is important, and I would like to see that stay in. That's a really important one to me. The other ones, I guess, are up for debate, especially if we have those same positions in the budget already that haven't been cut out, like new positions. We're just sort of saying, okay, you asked for 10, we're going to give you 4 in this budget. Like, I understand, and I'm okay with that. But yeah, those are the 2 hard ones for me.
One strategy around the special ed is, I mean, Director Crafts could probably spell out, if she knew what she had, what she would do. And so if the committee's vested in the way in which you said in special ed, above and beyond what's in the reductions for A, you could share a rough amount that you're comfortable with adding back, and we can get you the detail on what she thinks that should be. But I also want to remind you that special ed is so fluid in its budget. If she has the funds, she ends up moving things as needed anyway, based on an IEP, based on a potential hire. So of all the parts of the budget, that is kind of like the most fluid area, because by law, she has to do what she has to do. And so she has the resources. I guarantee she'll use them wisely. But instead of saying, I want one more clinician or one more ed tech, you might say something like, no, I'm comfortable saying I want another $600,000 there for her to use to program as effectively as she can. You could take that kind of approach. We'll still get detail in the budget because it has to have that, but that could be an option.
Counselor Harriman.
Thank you. So I'll just share that I'm going back and forth between option B and option C right now personally. But I also had a question about the next step busing line. I know $79,000 isn't nothing, but in the grand scheme of things, it's a fairly small amount. And I'm just a little concerned if that is going to impact students' ability to get to school.
So I don't think it prevents kids from getting to school. Anytime it does, we do have the vans, and so we've made sure that there are 2 vans available at Next Step for Philip to coordinate with his staff to use if we got to go get a kid, we got to drop them off, some kind of anomaly. As of right now, at the end of the day, a bus shows up there and it moves all of those kids that need to get on a bus at the high school to the high school. So they get a little ride up, they get off. The bigger challenge is in the morning. They get dropped at the high school and then they make their way down because those buses start elementary runs right away. So rain, shine, snow, ice, they're walking down there, but they do it. I've actually heard some kids say that they like the walk. It gets some energy up before school starts, but so I don't think it prevents kids from going to school, but I agree that we're transporting so many other kids. This just feels like a bit of a separate item. And option.
Thank you.
Member Gallant.
After all consideration and hearing everybody, I agree with Member Bowden. I believe that's our best way to go is to look at that and with the SROs and the special ed. So I agree, and I would approve of what Member Bowden put forth.
I'm just gonna go all the way around. Member Hurd.
Thank you. Excuse me. So yeah, I do like option A. As I'm thinking about, I just to figure it out a little bit, estimated increase per 150K home, you're looking at an extra roughly $24 a month that you're asking people to pay on top of that. So, and that's if you have $150,000. So we have ranges in the city of Lewiston from lower to much higher. So, I'm thinking about our elderly community who maybe they can't afford that extra $24 a month, or maybe they're, maybe their house is a little bit more, so they have to pay an extra $50 a month. And so are they then going to have to determine, well, am I going to be able to eat this week, or am I going to have enough to heat my home, or can I pay for electricity, or, those types of things. And that's always concerning to me, because I feel like, the elderly people in our community sometimes get forgotten a little bit, you know, people who are on a fixed income. So I do like option A better. And then I was just doing a little research in the binder, and last budget we were at $12.31, and option A gets us to $14.23. And then for 2023, we were $10.97. So historically, we've kind of gone about $2 increase on the mill rate every year, which I think has been well received-ish. Not everybody likes an increase on their taxes, but it does get approved for referendum. So I feel like if we're staying kind of close to that $2-ish mark, it's more feasible for people. People are okay with it because they've seen it the last couple of years in a row. 2021, 2022 was a weird year, so we're just not even going to go there. But again, I don't like the eliminating 2 SRO positions in option A. I have been kind of vocal about that, and I think if not just for the safety of our students, but we talked a little bit about the relationship that I feel we are required as a district to create between law enforcement and our students. And I think where we are now, 3 is just 1 SRO for elementary is just not enough there. I think we're failing at that. If our goal in elementary is strictly to create a relationship, we're failing. And so I think that is something that we definitely need to look at. I do like your idea of offering Kirsten just a number to say, like, this is what I think. Where again, you said it's fluid, and if she finds that she needs more for an outplacement coordinator, she can do that. If some of these like clinician or OT or speech or whatever don't get filled, but she could want something like that instead, or some CDS coordinator, I feel like that gives her a little bit more freedom to kind of do what she feels is best, which we all know that she's not going to do anything that that she doesn't need or that isn't necessary. I trust her just as much as I trust you. So I think that's kind of where I'm leaning, especially, we're thinking in the back of our heads, like we're up for reevaluation here pretty soon. So that's also in the back of my mind of what is that going to look like? We can't go back. So if we go too high the next year and something happens with the reevaluation, or the next year after that, like we can't go back. So if we can be as fiscal as possible with still providing as many services for our students as we can, I feel like that's probably our best option.
Member Eames?
So I also think option A is the best way for us to go, surprisingly, maybe to others. But I would argue for the LMS dean. I really feel like the safety, if an SRO provides safety in one way, I think that second dean provides safety net in another way. Like it really helps a slightly older set of kids get through those weird 2 years. And we know, having seen so many disciplinary hearings, how important that particular job is. So to me, I would argue I'm fine with the one SRO, and I'm good with if we put the LMS dean back in the mix, and some number for Kirsten, which we can talk about. That would be my thinking at the moment. Thank you.
Member Charpentier?
All right, thank you. I'd also agree with option A. And again, I think everyone knows I'm in the court for, the 1 SRO is definitely a necessity. I also agree with Elizabeth and think that our member Eames, I'm sorry, my apologies. I also agree that we should keep the dean or add the dean at the middle school. Is there also, the number is also, like she said, I'd also like to know what that number is, or if we could get a number for Kirsten, as far as, what she would need, or that fluid money, or that would be helpful. And I think that's it, but yeah, I think I'm in full support of option A as long as we leave the 1 SRO and the dean, I think, for me.
The
That's it.
full dollar amount on the special ed positions is 916,627 for all of the ones that are listed on here. But
Yeah,
so
we,
like a portion of that, a fraction of that is what you're saying?
yeah, well, a number amount of fluid money that she could use to fill all these positions that she needs, I think, or or as they come, I should say, sorry. And thank,
Member Medina?
So yeah, I also am okay with option A. I think it is really important that we at least have one SRO, especially around the community building, relationship building part of it, having mentors. And also in support of, I really want to have the dean of students, because as everybody expressed, it's very important. We see kids in here all the time. Middle school's tough, so I need as much support as they can get. I think is really important. And definitely just want to support all the special ed positions, because that's also very important. So yeah, it's all important.
one more thing that I forgot. As far as the teaching positions, we're cutting 2 at LHS and 2 at the middle school. We just cut one of those positions maybe instead of both, or just have one budgeted in case we need it, or just a suggestion. Thank you.
Member Medina?
I just had a question about the SRO. So I know that there's they're looking to hire some police officers currently. So like, is there somebody already in mind that's there, or like what happens? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we work with LPD on that. So if let's say conceptually these are approved tonight, I'd probably reach out to the chief to say, these are conceptually approved, just to have it on your mind. They do go through a hiring process. They do go through an SRO training process so that they're certified SROs. So it's a little bit of a cycle, not a full year type thing, but it may take a little time to figure that out. The other thing that they may have to look at from a city perspective is, we pay a portion of their salary, but I don't think they want less police officers. So they may have to look at a request in their salary to add the offset. So there's pieces like that to it, but I do think we'd work it out.
And then as far as like, say they do find somebody, are we allowed to be part of like the hiring process to ask questions? Because I do think the person that's in that seat is really important, and so I'd like to, some of us, maybe more than just me, would like to have some, role in that, but maybe even parents or, I don't know, so.
Yeah, in the past, I've had a name floated to me, and because of the work I do, for better or worse, I know a lot of officers. So I have that piece of it, but we've not actively participated in that hiring. Other than kind of having veto power, I guess. But I like that idea.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's.
Yep, go ahead.
So.
Thank you. So,
Real quick, Karen, just whispered in my ear.
oh yeah.
Principals have been participating in that process, but not others. They just.
Also, to my knowledge, and this is just from asking friends that I have on the that work for LPD, and Jake may correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that they check a box if they're interested in potentially being an SRO. So when they fill out paperwork or whatever, they have different options that they can check, and some of them do check if they're interested in an SRO position. So I think there's an interest there, so they're not just going to pull some random person and say, you're the new SRO, congratulations. It's someone who's potentially interested in working with our students and working in the schools.
Is the MOU that we put in place almost 4 years ago, still in place for our SROs?
Yep.
With the same language?
We
or-
do look at it annually. I think the one from 4 years ago shifted. We shifted it, I think, last year, but it's subject to review annually.
I know one
which
of
we
the
do.
things that we had put in it when Elgin and I sat with Lewiston PD to draft some of the language was that the SROs would be reporting out to us like incrementally, and I don't think we've had an SRO report. So if that's still in there, could we do that at some point?
We can get reports. I actually do get, I would say it's more frequent than intermittent or quarterly or anything. I talked to Corey Jakes. I don't wanna say weekly, but at least a couple times a month, if not 3 times a month. And all the SROs call me or text me for different things that come up, so.
But as far as
like a-
presentations to the school
yeah,
committee, we haven't
We
had any.
haven't, but I think we could definitely get that going. That's, I know they're prepared. They've been keeping track of, but we had shared some of the things they do day to day because we're tracking.
Member McLaughlin.
Thanks, yeah. So I would say where I'm at is option A, with 2.5 exceptions. One would be like, I think basically everybody has shared at this point, the special education kind of as a block. I think I would put it at around maybe from option A, an additional maybe 300 to 400,000 is what I had in mind. That seems to kind of as a block take more of what we see in option B, I think, in terms of amount. The other thing would be the dean of students. That I think a fair amount has been said about that. That seems very important to me. And just the question mark is the Article 5 restructuring for me. I think that it seems like we'll talk more about that. Just because it's not clear to me what the different amounts translate to in terms of service. And so I'd just like to learn more about that. Those things together, I think, would land around $4 million reduction, I should say. So in between option A and B. I guess I would say that includes removing a lot of things that I'm not happy about removing, but I guess I'm feeling that big picture, still a very large increase, frankly. I think appropriate given the situation. But it does make me worried. This is my first budget cycle, obviously, on the committee, but also having some familiarity with city finances, the city of Lewiston is not experiencing general property valuation growth, I would say, over a number of years. I don't see that changing anytime soon. The revaluation obviously changes the proportions, but not necessarily the fundamental growth. And so that it worries me to have such a large 1-year increase and the potential that I don't, excuse me, I don't see the needs of the school system decreasing anytime soon. I imagine they're only going to increase further. So with some of this stuff, it can feel like nickel and diming a little bit to talk about 80,000 here, 80,000 there, but it does add up. And I'm, in my own mind, trying to be relatively strict with myself, I would suppose, in terms of what I'm calling out. I think there's a fair amount of overlap there with what others have shared, not 100%, but I think, I think we're pretty close, and I think we can come to something that we all respect is my sense. Thank you.
So my priorities on this list are from a direct service approach, like what is direct service to our most vulnerable and the students that we often lose, I think. And so for that, it would be special ed, funding at least a portion of the special ed request. I think 300 to 400,000 sounds like a reasonable amount, somewhere around that ballpark. The LMS dean, the Geiger interventionist, specifically because it's a huge benefit to students, and it's one of the only things that Cindy asked attached to her budget. And then the Article 5, I'm really uncomfortable with just sort of a blanket of we're okay with Article 5, without discussing it further, just because the stuff, I don't know everything that's contained in this lump of student services, but I know it's student services, and I know it's student services that are hugely important to our district. And so those 4 things are my priorities: special ed, dean, Article 5, and Geiger interventionist.
I want to talk about 5 carefully. There are definitely some things that have happened in Article 5. They include a vacancy for a McKinney-Vento position, which is a district-wide full-time position as it currently sits as a job description. Excuse me? Currently vacant. Yep. We need to fill that, and I think we can. We're required to provide the service, not to fill the role. So the other layer to this is we have a staff at one of our elementary schools doing a real good job, who we're curious if there's room in title funds to move that role. We're trying to see if it fits by criteria, and it might be part of the role fits by criteria, but not the whole role. So either way, we look at trying to maintain the level of service that that position provides. We're also curious with that is, could that position take on a portion of the district's responsibilities for McKinney-Vento identification and resources? Some of that work's already happening now. It's kind of less formal. And then, so for an intake perspective, if I went to Chair Parks and and she was the McKinney-Vento person or even a point of contact, and I was currently experiencing challenges with a stable home situation, she would fill out all the paperwork with me and then send it to the person at Dingley. And that person would verify it, who knew the laws and the rules, and then qualify or not qualify students in their situations. So some of our better point of contact people, they get it. They have already filled out the state paperwork. They've already done all the documentation. So the next step is not a big additional task. I'm not saying it to minimize things. I'm saying people are doing good work up front, so that next task is fairly easy. Could that person just be the finish off person? It might need a little bit more money. It might require a little less time on some tasks, but still be able to do some of those tasks to help support the overall. And then the other portion is based on student resources, what we provide there. And again, if we had a different job description, do we get to a point where we can split it and say this person does that district piece that right now is open, much of their current role, and also does this other piece in the job description where they become two people doing resource and McKinney work instead of three people. And if so, could it be paid for differently? So that's the whole restructure conversation. I don't think that conversation is about not having the things in place now, at least from my perspective about restructuring. It's about, could people take on a little more? Does that shift compensation, but also save dollars? We also have that, the SEL equity position, I forget the new title, that's unfilled, that is part of that conversation restructuring. That's $134,000 item that we believe between all of those positions, could we create a two-headed approach to providing resources and ensuring that we, as Chair Park said, meet the law and support families correctly. So I don't know if that helps with the context. I actually think the money is there because of the vacancy. So the restructure isn't about doing less. It's about how we do it. But if we shift how we do it, if that makes sense, it could also save some of the salary. But to that point, looking at the different things said, I heard consensus around SRO. I heard consensus around a little more money for special education. I heard consensus around Dean. This isn't everybody, but just some consensus anyway. Some of the offshoots are the unknown of the Article 5 piece, which I understand. Geiger interventionist was mentioned, well, I think by all of you at one point, but in this particular moment, by one. CDS coordinated position by at least two, if not three of you. What am I missing? That's it. Oh, the high school and middle school positions, yes. One instead of two, yeah. If you, to give you a context, I was gonna say, because I don't have, you had mentioned the buses, but I didn't know if you were. Oh, okay.
No, those are, it was more of a question as to whether, whether it was going to impact people's ability to get to school, but that's, I think your explanation was good.
If you chose to, this is like my scratch pad here, with help. If you chose to keep the dean and one SRO, you could still reduce the budget by $4 million and have 336,000 and change left over. With that 336,000 and change, we could talk about how to resolve the Article 5 piece. And there may be additional funds there for special ed and to do something else that's there. That would be you reducing the budget by $4 million. They're proposed. With under option A with those caveats.
Counselor Harriman?
Thank you. I just wanted to add that, so if we took option A and then we added back one SRO, the LMS dean, if we say if we added back 400,000 for special ed and the Geiger interventionist, that gets us to a reduction of 3.85 million, which isn't that far off from option B. And we haven't even touched Article 5 yet. Just to put things in perspective.
Going with the numbers and compromise. If we did 400,000, I have been trying to follow my own math and I've lost myself now. So I don't know if you can do this quicker and better than I can, but 400,000 for special ed, the 76,000 for the dean, taking out the SEL equity piece at the 134, because I know that we do have a lot of the SEL interventionists that can probably together do all of that. That leaves 256 for Article 5. And then the 88 for the SRO, is that what it was?
88.
What does that work out to? Because I've run out of paper.
Leave SAL or take SAL?
Take the SEL piece out, leaving just the 256 for Article 5. That remains in the budget. So 400,000 for special ed, 76 for the dean, 256 for Article 5, and 88 for an SRO.
Are you looking at B?
I am not looking at anything. I'm looking at, I guess, A with just those 4 things. Yes.
Adam Hansen is in the audience working on the math right now.
256, 352.
So that would be leave,
Yes.
right? That would be a leave 256. $3,679,000.
That's the reduction. And then what? And then what does that do for the percentage increase? Down to 3,000. We're still working on numbers. If anybody's watching from home and wondering why everyone's silent, we're doing math.
We are not doing math. Somebody else is doing math.
We are watching people do math.
We are all yelling out numbers.
So for the Article 5, I'm just trying to make this make sense in my head. So this restructuring, taking all of this away, does not include, or it does include the vacant position that you were just talking about that could potentially move one of these positions that's in Article 5 into that position.
Yeah, so the restructure didn't take away any of the roles. It looked at trying to make a couple of them more dynamic, which might be split cost-wise, but create a little saving.
So after you explaining that to me, I would feel comfortable with option A, with reducing that amount. Because it's not like we're actually losing anything per se. We're just kind of like moving people around and maybe typing up people's job description is really what we're doing. And so as long as we're not losing any of those positions, we're just trying to figure out a better way to serve our students. I feel like I'm okay with that 390.
It is losing it, though. We currently have 3 people in those roles, and that would be restructuring those 3 people into one role, essentially. Member Medina?
I'm just curious if like there's been conversations with these people and like letting them know, like, no? Okay.
No, because we can scare people away pretty quickly and not actually have to do that. So that's what makes it tricky to even talk about, because it's people, right? So that's hard.
So, and I don't know if any of these positions currently in Article 5 are ESER funded positions. And you don't have to tell me if they are or not, but also too, if we're going along.
One is.
Okay, so if we're going along that line of like, these are, I mean, you've named a couple already on this list that are ESER funded positions, and they've always kind of been known that they potentially were gonna sunset at some point and we weren't gonna necessarily be able to pull them into our budget, so. For me, as long as we are covered legally by what we are required to provide for our students with reducing this amount, for me personally, I would feel better about reducing the amount here, because again, we're still providing the services that we need for our students. And then either reducing that off the bottom line, or then being able to put more money into special education lump sum or whatever we're offering to Kirsten for her programming.
Did we get a percentage on the 3,679,000? Like what that comes down to as the,
He's doing it right
oh,
now. It's a whole equation sheet.
Okay.
It's tax.
did you have, go,
I can do it. It's the same sheet. We'll just mess each other.
If he has an answer first.
So it would be with the overall budget increase of 10%.
like even? Wow.
One,
22 point, a
I'll say it.
10%
I'll repeat
increase,
it.
okay.
I'll repeat them.
Go ahead. I thought that he was gonna say
If,
the numbers out loud, but I think they're still working on it.
Can I go, or were you about
Go
to?
ahead. I'm gonna get them and then keep them so everybody.
Okay, well, I was gonna make a somewhat process maybe related proposal, but I guess I was gonna suggest if it would make any sense to, so that list just discussed was ending up with a 3.6 million reduction. I was going to ask if it would make sense for this meeting if we set a target of a $4 million reduction, understanding the points of discussion that we've identified. We have a chance to go more in the weeds on Article 5 and maybe get something more specific on whether 300,000 or 400,000 makes more sense for the special education piece. And we factor that into where we want to end up, maybe between the 3.6 and 4. I'm asking that because I don't necessarily know the timing of what we have in front of us to sort that out.
Yeah, so from a timing and process question, answer your first question is yes, we can do all of that. we're at a point in the process where you could vote tonight on a number and instruct me to figure those things out and report back to you. And you could be done with budget meetings for the time being until the city meeting. We could also come back and talk about those items. We can do so in executive session and hash out some things that are personnel specific. We could do some things more in public ways. So it's all feasible. I guess my point is from here until the 9th, when we meet with the city council, those meetings as it relates to the budgets are essentially if needed. Some years we've needed them and some years we've needed less of them. So I want you to be comfortable with what you're voting on too. I think that's critically important.
Yeah. Just a quick follow-up. I mean, part of the reason I say that is it's not 100% clear to me still what the differences are between the different levels of the Article 5 restructuring line. And it seems like to get more into that detail, we would be maybe crossing that personnel line. So that's why I'm phrasing it that way.
But I can tell you straightforward, a big part of the potential fluctuation is what can be paid for through other ways. And we were looking hard at the title funds, which might have resulted in a full position being able to be funded differently. Part of it was also whether or not you would reduce by the SEL role for 134. If you did, what does that mean? So there was other factors for that, because it's all within that one line.
Member Bowden?
Thank you. I would actually concur with Member McLaughlin on the idea of giving you a number, and I like that $4 million mark. I think that's a pretty good bullseye for you to hit there with the things that we discussed. However that looks, and I agree that I think we need to have an executive about Article 5 just to talk further, especially where you're bringing up like that SEL position, that funding that can go towards that. I know you mentioned a grant possibly in the works. So the whole restructuring piece, I think we just need more information on it. And like Member Hurd wasn't here for that executive session, so I think she needs to be caught up. So I really think that's an important piece of it. But I would agree with Phoenix as far as that $4 million mark. I think is a great spot to be at. Vote on that.
Does Member Medina?
No, I was just gonna say I agree with that. I think that this is a discussion that needs to be had in executive session. And I know that Article 5 provides a lot of very important services. So yeah, I just wanna third that, I guess.
Is there, without a vote, obviously, some kind of a consensus that we want to aim for the 400,000? And if so, the 4 million? Right? 4 million.
Yep.
Yes. And then if there is sort of a consensus on that, are we prepared to vote on that tonight?
Right, sorry, a couple things. Well, I don't think you have to vote. I would take this, just like our other meetings, as input to guide whatever we bring back. I also had a little more to share with you from an idea perspective and separate of Article 5. But I do want to put that up first, if that's okay. No, it's not a savings thing. Sorry. Okay. I'm gonna kind of skip. We've talked about a lot of this around fund balance, and again, the leaner we go, the less excess we have, the less excess, the less we can carry, and at some point that's going to be a thought process. But one of the things that I think is within reach, given the unfilled positions and the use of research funds to be strategic, would be for the committee to consider creating a reserve. This is something we did last year around the special education unknowns for the tuition costs. But one idea is to use some unspent funds that have been verified through the audit to create a $3 million reserve for facilities use as it relates to any improvements we want to make to properties, things that are needed to be done. To expend these reserves, they go through you. They have to be used for the slated purpose. that is a separate item that gets approved by the city council. So there's steps in it, but you can use unused funds to create reserves that have specific purpose. With the specific purpose, you know what the intent of them are. For example, this year we have as I mentioned, the 1 million for special education tuition. We've not yet had to use that. We may have to use that. If we do have to use it for that intended purpose, we can. If we want to shift the purpose of the use of that, it has to go to you and the city council. So just so you know, there's a layer of protections there, but this would not increase the local tax burden. It's a decision that the committee could make, and if the city council approves, and then through referendum, it could be created as a reserve to be used for those purposes. So it's something I wanted to share with you as a strategic thought that I have. The money is there if that's a direction you choose to go. What it doesn't do is create it doesn't create an artificial number for next year either, that the budget was this, so we have to go up. It's kind of functions separate of that. So it's the budget is still the budget. This is kind of a separate action that happens at the same time.
Member Bowden?
Thanks. So I guess my question is, I know that we're using 5 million right off the top on our budget, right? And we kind of have to do that again next year as well.
Mhm.
If we take 3 million, what does our fund balance look like right now? Like what is the balance of it?
So in the audit, it was approaching, was it 11, Adam? 11 million?
Okay, so moving 3 into a reserve, 8, and then we use 5 next year, and then what happens the following year if we don't have?
Right, so we continue to try to make sure we're being efficient with the budgets we do have, but at some point we have to look at how we spend less
Right.
of the fund balance.
So we
'cause it
have to
will-
stop putting 5 million of it into our budget every year?
Correct, right. If it.
Okay.
If the committee wanted to, for example, this year, you could say, we're gonna find that $4 million target, we're gonna use $1 million less in fund balance and raise the ask locally. That's the only way to shift.
Okay.
Unassigned fund balance is 11.1. And that's been built up over multiple years.
Counselor Harriman?
Thank you. I think this sounds like a good idea. I mean, we're probably always going to need repairs and upgrades to facilities. And this just moves it into a bucket where we can use it for that. I do wonder, would this also allow for purchasing of facilities, or would it just be repairs?
I think we want to be as specific as we can. I think that's responsible. If it's not written with that specification or includes either, I think that would be important. If it doesn't include a level of detail, it could be used for other things. I always prefer a little more detail. So if it could be used for a purchase of property or facilities, improvements or upgrades, I think we would want to say that in the language. But if it's one or the other, or could be either, I would say add that so that everybody knows that that's what it could be used for. I think that's important.
Member Hurd?
Thank you. I am okay with it, but I just want to make sure we're exhausting all options before we dig into this. So we're getting grants, we're looking for other sources of funding. This is like hit your piggy bank with a hammer money. You know what I mean? I want to make sure that we're not just going to this first instead of exhausting all of our other options before we, dig into this balance, because like Member Bowden said, the only way to reduce it is to ask for it at a local level, which that's what we're trying to do here, is to not ask for that. So if we cannot dip into this and we can find other sources, like I said, by grants or whatever we can find, I think I'm fine with it, just as long as we do that first before digging into this.
So plenty of room to ponder. This would be part of the budget package. So I just wanted you to see it separately because it functions separately of kind of these big numbers that we keep talking about. And Adam, you said you have, oh, that was the 11 one. Okay. So do we, sorry, I know he said my name and I forgot to turn. I feel like have clear direction to look at that 4 and figure out some of the other components and bring it back to you in a way that we can either say it right out loud or maybe we schedule an executive session. It's like an if needed component. Right now, we're scheduled to meet next Wednesday as an if needed. Is there any interest in the committee to meet next Monday? This just stays on my brain all the time. So I just.
I already had it on my calendar for every Monday and Wednesday until we were done, so.
I'm fine with that, but we did just schedule a negotiations meeting right before this. I was in a negotiations meeting. We scheduled again for Monday, but was it at 3:30? Okay, it would be 3. So yes, that would work.
Member Medina?
I just have a question about the, if we put the money in the facility, the reserve, if we do get grants to pay for things, can that money be put back or does it have to stay there?
Yeah, so reserve funds stay in the reserve, which is a nice thing because you don't have to like do this every year thing. It can stay there. Or you can opt to put it back into the general fund. So that is an option. But it's also one of the things people think about. So when you put money in an account like that and it's specific, what if you don't? What if you, from a facilities perspective, with LCIP being such a challenge year to year, if it sat for a while, so be it. But I don't imagine we wouldn't use it, but it would be using it in lieu of other tax requests, I guess is part of the point. I think in a perfect world, a reserve like this that would be built for an organization our size would be 3 times the size of that. And we would never go and ask for LCIP dollars, potentially. We're far away from that, but these are those structures that we want to start to build. So if we do get a grant, we can match it and have different opportunities.
And in our current reserve is just the 1 million that we had set aside last year for the tuition.
Yeah, for the tuition
fluctuation.
unknowns, yes.
Okay.
And even this year, the tuition unknowns have turned into big increases. We're trying to absorb what we can in the budget, to Member Hurd's point, and not crack that piggy bank unless we have to. But we may in fact have to, but we're trying to dodge that.
Do we earn any significant interest on a $1 million reserve?
It's like the lottery, but yeah, we do. Low interest.
The city earns interest.
Oh.
The
So we
city
don't.
earns interest on reserves. Still saves money at some point somewhere. As long as it's been approved to be spent. So we good with meeting Monday and we'll bring back some plans and some detail around it. No, Monday we'll get it out in public that it's a budget workshop, but we'll have an executive session. It may be useful if the committee is okay with it to start with the executive session that is specific to that and then have the budget workshop. So let's plan for 5:30 start. And we'll do executive session and then we'll plan to start the regular meeting or the workshop at 6. If that works. Okay, we can do that. And location wise, I will check. It'll either be here or across the way, but I'll see what's available.
Okay, agenda item number 4 is to enter into executive session to conduct student A disciplinary hearing title 20A 10019 and title 14056B. Is there a
So
motion?
moved.
Thank you. And a second? Did you get all that? Janet and Craig, I think? Oh,
Greg and then Jan.
Janet made the motion, Craig seconded it.
Okay.
But Megan also made the motion, but it was at the same time. All in favor? School committee is in executive session at 7:45 PM.